Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Flourish FM, a podcast for the good life. We're delighted to host two guests on today's show, both of whom are expert psychotherapists and counselling psychologists. Dr. Ritika Suk Birah, aka Dr. Ritz, and Dr. Victoria Uwannah. Ritz has a Ph.D. in psychotherapeutic and counselling psychology and over 12 years experience in the clinical field, and she focuses on delivering sought-after mental health and well-being programs rooted in neuroscience. She co-hosts the Therapy Floor podcast with our second guest, Dr. Victoria Uwannah, who also has a PhD in psychotherapeutic and counselling psychology and has been working in mental health for over 15 years, providing therapeutic and consultation services. Nick, what did you love most about our conversation with Ritz and Victoria?
I think the topic that was probably most unique to this conversation was authenticity. We've talked a little bit about values and congruence and coherence in other episodes, but not quite to this depth. And I think for them and their orientation to flourishing, mental health, well-being seems to really kind of orient around this idea of authenticity. So it was fun to dig into that, more deeply with them. But we also hit some other topics that are always useful: resilience, cognitive behavioral techniques, things like that. So overall, a well-rounded conversation, but it was authenticity I enjoyed.
Awesome. Me too. This is How Becoming Authentic Helps You Flourish with Dr. Ritz Birah and Dr. Victoria Uwannah. Ritz, Vicky, welcome. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Enjoying the sun today. It's been a lovely day.
I'm really, really well. Just excited to be here and catch up with you and Nick. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, we're delighted to have you both here on the show. Really look forward to our conversation today. And yeah, we're both also enjoying the sun right now. Now, you have both got a wealth of experience and expertise in psychotherapy and counselling psychology, having worked with diverse individuals, groups, and organizations over many years. And this podcast, Flourish FM, focuses on the science of human flourishing. And we'd love to learn from your perspectives about how to most effectively support people to flourish. So to kick things off today, from your experience, what would you say are the main things people today are struggling with that prevent them from flourishing? Things that might even be causing people to languish?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it could all depend on what people mean by flourish. And I think that can be such an individual perspective. But I think for me, I'm very much in the camp of, if you're living life inauthentically, it's really hard for you to flourish. And when I say inauthentically, I'm talking about, people that have masks on, who feel like they have all these sorts of expectations that have been placed on them, either internally or externally, lots of shoulds. I should be doing this. I should be at my peak potential, whatever it could be. And I think that can sometimes stop people from thinking, hold on, what's actually my life values? What makes sense to me? And am I living life according to those? And I think without that inauthenticity, it can be really hard to flourish and to have a successful life, because again, success is different to different people, right? So I think that's the main thing for me, in authenticity.
And I feel like, just drawing on that a bit more, what Vicky was saying, that often what I see in the therapy room, and I think what we've seen through some of our dilemmas as well, is that when people are inauthentic, they're often really overcomplicating their life, because there's also just so much noise out there at the moment. There's that endless options of things that we can be doing. There's constant, information overload that we're getting from our screens. And I feel that it's so easy to slip into analysis paralysis when we are in that languishing phase, because we spend so much time thinking rather than actually doing something. So we tend to see people just get really stuck in their own heads, and they're just waiting for this, perfect moment to change or to begin, rather than just starting small and steady.
Yeah. So I have two immediate related questions, or maybe we can define a couple of terms. And Vicky, you pointed out right away. How do you both, and Vicky, you can start if you don't mind, how do you both think about and define flourishing?
I mean, to phrase like a non-psychological term, I think it's kind of like living your best life, whatever that means to you. And that could be, it doesn't have to be defined by like money. It doesn't have to be defined by like career progression or even relational status. But what brings you a sense of contentment? What brings you a sense of ease, but also feeling like, oh, there are some things that are challenging my life, things that I want to achieve. It's that balance between I'm happy with, I'm okay with who I am, and I'm also wanting to be better, to do better. So I think, yeah, it again, it depends on the individual. Like, what does that mean for you? What does success look like for you? What does contentment look like for you? And challenge. I mean, for some people, it might be climbing Mount Everest, and that can be a sign of them being at their peak. And for some people, it could be being a stay-at-home mum and, getting to having the privilege of watching their children grow up.
Yeah. I literally just came off another podcast with a woman. She's actually a fellow Brit, Karen Dark, who hand biked up to Everest Base Camp. So it's funny that you mentioned Everest of all things. She's an incredible
That's
woman.
Amazing.
That's like barely in her top 5 of life accomplished. She is an absolutely incredible human. But either way, that's a great, I really love the practicality of that definition. Ritz, how about you? Flourishing.
I think for me, if I'm applying it to my own life, it kind of echoes what Vicky was saying. For me, when I'm flourishing, I'm really content. So I'm not striving for more. I feel like it comes much more organically. And I'll give you an example of that, of how that looks in my own life. I remember actually talking about it with my supervisor like a few months ago. And I was saying, I've got this feeling where I go to bed in the evening and I'm excited. Like, I'm excited to get my 8 hours of sleep. I'm excited to wake up and be at the breakfast table with my kids. Well, wake up before them so I get that time to myself. Otherwise, if they wake up before me, all hell breaks loose. But I'm excited for that. I'm excited to, pack them off, send them off and start my day. And it's feeling quite easy, quite natural, rather than I'm living by this rule of I should, I have to, I must. So I think flourishing is something that you are in a state of flow. It's coming organically, it's coming naturally to you, but you also recognize you can't be there all the time. I think when we push ourselves to constantly flourish, that's when we're going to lead to burnout.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The dark side of flourishing, where you're just aiming, you make it all goal oriented, the things that in some ways you don't want to be goal oriented, but do all the time, like being in flow, for example, right? Just absorbing yourself in something that takes your mind off maybe the goals you have, right?
Absolutely. And I think when you're pushing yourself to be in that constantly and you're chasing the next high, you're not stopping to smell the roses. You're not allowing your body to decompress and to balance itself out. And we're all going to go through moments of that within our day, within our week, within the month, where we have to stop, pause, rebalance. And I really believe like rest and nourishment and recuperation are part of flourishing too.
Yeah. The point you made then really resonates about trying to flourish too more can actually be counterproductive. We had a guest a few months ago, Uwannah, that wrote an excellent book called Toxic Productivity, where she defines productivity becoming toxic as where just your whole life is so goal-oriented, it just becomes exhausting. So even the most relaxing, enjoyable things become super goal-oriented that you kind of stop enjoying them anymore. Like, I don't know, you're going to relax with your friends, but you're like, we must have really deep, meaningful conversations the whole time, or we're wasting our time. And it must be this long. It must be this location. It's like, just relax and find your flow, for example. Just let yourself relax into it.
Yeah.
So
that's the opposite, isn't it? Of like being authentic. Because you're not.
Can we ask about, I went into immediate kind of nerd mode there, right? Because during my dissertation, I wrote about like autopoiesis and the somatic self and these nerdy terms that sort of suggest or ask, what is authenticity? If we're constantly developing ourselves and narrating ourselves and understanding ourselves, if we make that assumption, you might push back against that. How do we know what is? Because I love the idea of authenticity. I hear congruence. I hear coherence. These are like foundational ideas for, I think, flourishing living, right? And mental health in many cases. It's a simplistic question, right? For a complicated response, I'm sure. How do we know what is authentic? Right? And I'm happy to put that to either of you that want to answer first.
Okay, gosh, Nick, you're coming in with the tough questions.
I know. Yeah, I'm aware. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's getting my brain thinking. That is such a good question. Like, how do I know if I'm being authentic? Um, I think I'd lean heavily into the somatics and just feeling for people who are that way inclined and who are quite in touch with their body or who want to be more in touch with their body and having that felt sense of what feels right. Like Ritz was saying about the flow, the sense of ease. Maybe I can speak from my experience as well. When I'm not being authentic, I feel it so viscerally in my body. I feel tension. I feel like I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I feel a sense of urgency and a sense of hurry to kind of make a decision or to move forward. But yet at the same time, there's a hesitancy. There's something pulling me back. So I don't know how to describe it, maybe even necessarily psychologically. Maybe Ritz, you can do a better job at that than me. But I think there is something to say about the somatic sense of dis-ease and discomfort within your body. And I think it's easier to know when you're not living authentically because you'll be questioning yourself, like, is this right? Is this for me? There'll be some clues that will tell you that maybe I feel like I'm living life by a certain set of rules. Like in cognitive behavioral therapy, we have these cognitive distortions or these unhelpful rules that we live by. If I
should statements.
do X,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I must do this. And if I want to be happy or successful or to be accepted by people, then I must. I think those are telltale signs that someone is living inauthentically.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, Nick, what it was reminding me of, and I bet Vicky's going to be like, did we do this? I don't remember this because she seems to have amnesia when we think about our training. But it just reminds me of the first 2 weeks of the first year of our training, because Vicky and I trained together as psychologists. Okay. And we were learning about Carl Rogers. So he is, one of the, I guess, most famous psychotherapists, counselors of person-centered humanistic therapy. And really what he said is, when you are training to be a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, and you're in the presence of another human being, you only need 3 conditions, really. And that is like congruence, that authenticity. And how do you do that? By just showing empathy, by just showing, positive regard for the other person. But there was one phrase that one of our trainers always used, and that was just be curious. When you go into the therapy room, when you're in the presence of another person, you don't necessarily have to have like, I need to say this, I need to say that. As you were saying, like, I need to go and have these deep and meaningful conversations, or this person's coming to me for therapy, so I have to give them something huge to take away. Actually, just be with them. Just listen to them. Let your body do the talking too. Notice what your body's picking up as they're speaking to you, and then use that to trust yourself, to trust the other person, and to let that guide where the narrative is going. And that's something in psychology we call process, like looking at the process of what's going on between 2 people.
Sounds like there's a decent amount, and maybe you'd push back against this term, but I just kept thinking intuition.
Yeah.
Which is in and of itself can be I find it to be somewhat abstract, even as someone who tries to think about it really seriously. Are there ways you go about, and maybe that was the answer you just gave. Maybe you said it'll be the same answer, but ways you go about helping people try to get more aware of, maybe in touch, maybe even assess their intuition. I mean, Vicky, your point about somatics is well made, but anything else you'd add to the list? Sorry there, Ritz.
Yeah, definitely. I would say it's going back to the body. Like the body knows before you know. So when I take a client through a formulation of what might be going on for them, and I draw out the CBT cycle of your thoughts that influence your feelings, which is influencing your physical, bodily sensations, which is influencing your behavior, and then you're going round in this vicious cycle. I will always say, and I firmly believe this too, before you even know what you're thinking, your body is going to be telling you. So whether that's, that fluttering heart, or your palms sweating, or you realize, oh my gosh, I've been clenching my jaw for the last 10 minutes. I think that's intuition. That's going into yourself, learning how to trust yourself. And I don't think a lot of people actually know how to really trust themselves. And then using that as information to guide you forward.
Yeah. So let's this is awesome. Let's go into some practical strategies for at least two of these things you mentioned: process in psychology and trusting yourself. So can you expand more on this idea of process and how someone can become more aware of process? What exactly that means, and how that can benefit someone to become more aware of the thought processes they're going through, or their process of navigating difficult things in life? Please expand on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, do you want me or Vicky to go?
All right, I should have directed it. Let's kick off with you, Ritz. Go for you, Ritz. Let's begin with. All right.
So for me, when I'm looking at process and what's happening between me and another, I think a really powerful technique that I like to use is called the helicopter view. So zooming out, and rather than being really in it, zooming out and looking at, right, if this is two people right now having a conversation, what's actually going on between them? What's being said? Like, what can you actually hear being said? And also, what would I be picking up on that's not being said through body language, through nonverbal communication, through the pauses, through the silences, through the hesitancies? So to me, that's how I begin to understand the process of what's going on between one person and another, or myself and another. I don't know if Vicky, you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think you kind of described it really well. When I think of process, I also think of literally going through a process with someone, and the path to knowing yourself better, understanding yourself more, figuring out who you are. It takes time. And I think the process can sometimes unravel over time. So looking for those for the wider context. So that could be, like what's going on in the room between an individual, between two individuals. What are some of the sensations and feelings that are being triggered within you? What are some of the emotions that are being picked up in the room but not being spoken? What's going on in that person's external world as well that actually comes into the room too? So when I think of process and the process between two individuals, I'm thinking of, okay, this takes time. It takes trust to just let the process unfold. And yeah, there are just lots of different external factors that could come into it. Yeah. Does that make sense? Have I added more? Have I confused things?
It makes sense. And you added this word trust to it then as well. So that was my second question about a practical strategy. It sounds like it's connected with this. What are some good strategies for cultivating trust in yourself and perhaps trust in the process? Start with you, Vicky.
I think Ritz touched on this earlier, and it's about being curious and daring to ask questions, being courageous in asking questions, and waiting to hear the answer. That may sound a bit airy-fairy, so let me explain. I think that sometimes when people come to therapy, they want to have answers. They want to have quick strategies. They want things to be just really fast-paced. Fix this problem for me. And sometimes some things just literally need to unravel, and you need to trust the therapist to guide you through a greater exploration of yourself, of the situation, experiences that you've been through. And that can be quite frustrating. And for people who want fixed, quick answers. So I think there's trusting in the therapist that they are capable enough to hold you and to hold the room, and that things will unravel over time. But I think it can be quite courageous to do so, because sometimes we have to go deep for us to go far, and sometimes some people necessarily don't want to go deep. They don't necessarily want to look themselves in the mirror. They don't necessarily want to ask those difficult questions or look into maybe their childhood experiences. So I think it takes trust, it takes courage to let the process unravel over time.
Yeah, I think Vicky's explained that so beautifully. I think someone who's had a history where they've really struggled to trust themselves, they need to find a relationship, whether that's with a therapist or another person, where they feel safe enough to be vulnerable, that the other person can be there for them, hold them, trust them, trust their vulnerability. And that's almost like that relationship then gets used as that tool to help you to learn to trust yourself. Like, oh, this other person can see me at my worst and can handle that and sees these like prickly sides to me and these shadow sides to me. They're not turning their back on me. God, that's never happened before. You know, normally people walk out on me or they call me out and it's in not a very nice way, but this person is showing me like real love in regards to these qualities. And I think that when we get those experiences in life, that's when we begin to trust ourselves, because trusting ourselves is also about accepting ourselves. And it's accepting that, you know, we're fallible human beings. We're not these perfect robots. We get it wrong. We all have shadow parts to us. We all have these, you know, prickles and these niggly bits that when we look at them, they make us cringe and we think, I wish I didn't have that, or I wish I didn't do that. But we get to a place where we're able to trust that, yeah, I have that, but actually, you know, I'm also a good person. I'm also good enough. And I think that that's a real powerful part of process and trust and flourishing.
Hi, friends. Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com. What do you think the role, if any, is of unpleasantness in human flourishing? And part of the reason I ask is some of what you've described, vulnerability is a great example. You both said it. That requires distress tolerance. That's an unpleasant experience, right? And we get into this a lot in our conversations. And I was kind of noting here some of the things you mentioned for flourishing, and there's maybe an element of striving with challenges. Well, that might be pretty unpleasant in some cases. You both just described process around relationships, like good relationships seem to often have some unpleasantness, right? And at the same time, we're talking about contentedness and quality of life and living your best life. And so I wonder, maybe both, and Vicky, we can come back to you, but maybe how you think about and work with clients around any potential synergies between those things. Or maybe you push back and say, no, there is no utility unpleasantness. Like, let's keep it positive vibes only. What do you think, Vicky?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not the kind of therapist that's just like, oh, everything is great and a bed of roses. And yeah, no, we're here for the real. I think unpleasantness is a part of life. Suffering is a part of life, whether we like it or not. And I mean, I'm not going to get into too much of like an existential kind of viewpoint, but some people may think, well, maybe we're here to suffer. But I think that suffering is inescapable. But I think maybe there's two types of suffering.
I wanted to ask you about that. Okay.
Yeah, maybe there's necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering.
Okay.
So maybe there is suffering that leads us to greater improvement, We reach milestones, we achieve amazing goals, we learn more about ourselves, we develop healthier relationships. Those things take jostling and wrestling and take a lot of grit. But maybe there is also unnecessary suffering. So maybe habits that we get into that that really aren't working for us, but we find it difficult to let go or to change certain things. Self-sabotage, maybe, yeah. So I'd say that there's probably two camps of suffering, in my opinion: necessary and unnecessary.
Thanks. It's a good nuance, and I thought I heard that a bit kind of in your early explanations of flourishing, and so I wondered if you'd take us there and wanted to tease it out a little bit. Ritz, you agree? Would you add anything, push back at all?
100%. I think in my work that I do with resilience, which I think is very similar to flourishing, I think the two go hand in hand. And one of the, I'd say, most practical things that I teach is emotional regulation is a skill for resilience. And I talk about emotions are, especially like these negative ones that you're talking about, these uncomfortable ones, they tend to fall into three camps. And I call them sad, mad, and scared. And what happens is, I feel like in very much the world that we have all probably grown up in this Western fast-paced world, we've been taught by, caregivers and culture and schooling systems, be happy, be peaceful, be calm all the time. And as soon as you're feeling sad, mad, or scared, don't feel that. Come back to feeling happy. How many times have you heard like a child crying or being upset, and then the response is stop crying, look at this toy, or look at this, or look at that. And so that's how we learn to grow up, being emotionally dysregulated and not having those skills. But when you can start to recognize, actually, your emotions are fine. You're just adding fear to them, and you're adding avoidance to them. So you're taking them from like a level of a 3 out of 10 to about a 6 out of 10. And so when you've gone there, your ability to think rationally in your is totally offline, because your amygdala is firing. That's where all your emotions are. And so when you can do a skill like a breathing technique or a grounding technique to emotionally regulate, to basically throw a bit of water on your amygdala, calm it down to about a level or a 3 or a 4, so that your prefrontal cortex can get back online. And then, like when your sadness or your anxiety is at about a 3, you are more likely to be able to think. You are more likely to be able to say, okay, what do I need to do with this situation? If I need to do anything at all, because often you might not even need to, you might just need to sit with it. And when I explain that to grown adults, so much of the time the response is, why did nobody teach me this in school? Or why was I learning about algebra or like Pythagoras? How is that helping me now as an adult, when I should have actually been taught about my emotions and how to regulate them? So I 100% believe that all emotions are valid and we need all of them.
Right. I love this distinction between two types of suffering, and this emphasis on resilience and emotional self-regulation. Let's go into this a bit further. So perhaps that's an example there, Ritz, of a type of suffering that you work with your clients to try to accept because it's necessary suffering, such as, yes, this experience is difficult. We all feel these kinds of emotions from time to time, but you can kind of make them worse by dwelling on them in certain ways or catastrophizing through them and so on. Would that be an example of necessary suffering that a person needs to build the skills to overcome or cope with through emotional self-regulation and building resilience? Or would that be an example of unnecessary suffering that one can overcome, so therefore it's unnecessary? Just so I can understand the distinction more.
I think that's almost like a 2-step model there, because the first part is going to be the necessary, because you needed it in the first place. Something was going on for you, so you had a feeling, your body responded to it, and the sirens going off, something's going on here. But what you did to that, something's going on here, that's probably the unnecessary part that was coming in, where it went bigger. The catastrophizing was the fear and the avoidance. Like, let me think. Let me get to the worst case scenario, which is most likely going to be quite unnecessary. but you do it as a way to keep yourself safe because you weren't probably taught a skill to bring it down and then maybe go and ask for help or think about what do I need to do in this situation. So I think there's a bit of a twofold thing going there. The first part being necessary, and then the behavior that we're adding to the feeling is potentially going to be unnecessary or unhelpful to us.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Anything you want to add to that, Vicky?
No, I think Ritz described that quite well. I guess the only other thing I was thinking is that sometimes maybe we can bounce between the two and maybe one is a bridge to the other. Yeah. And because sometimes, the things that we're working through, let's just say someone has come into the clinic room and they're struggling with, I don't know, like a relationship. They're thinking that they need to divorce their partner. So they're in a place of suffering, right? And they want to work it through. They want to think about, okay, is this the right relationship for me? What are the things that I'm contributing to this unhealthy dynamic? I think that's all part of the unnecessary suffering of getting to that place of being in a state of health, whether that's single, whether it's with that person, whether it's another person. But then I think it's like enlightening that person to the ways in which they are causing unnecessary suffering, or once they are aware of what they need to do, how can we help them to action those things out, action those steps out in a way that doesn't cause unnecessary suffering? But then again, sometimes it may come back to the necessary because, sometimes you have to go round and round a mountain, but, you are getting further and further up the mountain, but you're just seeing it from a different vantage point, even if you end up in the same spot. So, yeah, I'd say there's a bit of back and forth between both of them.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned resilience and emotional self-regulation. Let's talk about the practical side of those as well, because you both work on this a hell of a lot. So what are some of the most effective strategies you found for helping people build the skills of resilience and emotional self-regulation? Start with you, Ritz.
So I think, firstly, educating people that just because you think something, it doesn't make it true. When you can lay out some really good facts for someone and kind of let them know, for example, like if I'm teaching somebody about this, what I'll often say to them is, you have around, I think it's something like around 60,000 thoughts a day, of which 80% are likely to be negative. So then if you imagine your thoughts as trains, and you're stood at a train station and your thoughts are coming in and going out and coming in and going out, and you're trying to get on all of those trains, like you're literally going to exhaust yourself. So I think resilience is the skill of resilience is having awareness of that, is having awareness that just because you think something, it doesn't make it true. You're not your thoughts. It's learning the skill of something called in metacognitive therapy, metacognition. And that's really where mindfulness comes from, the ability to step back, to observe, and to learn how to respond rather than react. So you can see that thought coming in, you can see that train pulling in, but you watch it, you observe it, you use these techniques of mindfulness to recognize, right, when those doors open, do I need to get on it and get trapped and spiral away? Or actually, am I going to stand back, watch those doors eventually shut, and let that train pull out of the station on its own, and then get back to whatever it is I might be doing or whatever it is I might need to do next? So I think mindfulness and being able to watch your thoughts, recognize that you're not your thoughts, are such important skills of resilience. And if you think about what stress is about perception, right? So when we aren't resilient, we're often calling ourselves to be, under stress or in really stressful situations. And so when we look at things like, let's say, a cup, is it half full? Is it half empty? And people might say, well, the people that are resilient are going to say, oh, the cup is half full. And the people that are not resilient are going to say the cup is half empty. Actually, resilience is about recognizing the cup is refillable. So it's about keep coming back to yourself. You're on this journey. It's not going to be straightforward and going up. It's learning to ride those waves, learning to watch yourself, and then balance yourself out using things like mindfulness, breathing techniques, and grounding skills.
Yeah, I think I'd also add to that, you know, emotions aren't necessarily a dirty word. You know, it's they're communication tools, right? Emotions are telling us something, and thank goodness we have them, right? So I think it's about helping people to be, again, curious about what their emotions are telling them. So when they are in that state of being able to stand back, like on the train platform, as Ritz was saying, rather than getting on the train and going along with the thought or the emotion. But when they're able to sit back and observe and ask themselves questions like, what is this sadness teaching me right now? What is this anger and frustration trying to tell me right now? And then the thinking part again can come in where we think, okay, how can I respond rather than react to this anger telling me that I'm being disrespected or my boundaries are being crossed? How can I act from a place of calm and I guess being in some sort of control? So yeah, when I think of emotion regulation, I also think of, okay, let's think of our emotions as communication tools. What are they trying to tell me right now?
It's probably worth noting is, you know, you've both said it mostly explicitly, but implicitly a couple times. We're talking about emotion regulation and resilience. And I think a lot of people hear that and think top down, it's happening in here. Right. But like the affective neuroscience, these things are bi-directional. And Vicky, you've pointed this out early on. You might feel them before you think about them. Right. And Ritz, you mentioned too, like if that's the case, you might need to breathe or access your body before you even get to the point of being able to challenge your thoughts as well. Right. And you've mentioned this multiple times. I just kind of wanted to double click on it here again, because I think it's really important when people hear emotions or thoughts or feelings, they think it's all happening up here. You've both pointed out it is not. So you might want to enter that regulatory state from either direction, right? Brain or body.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the urge is going to be to go for the brain, like let me think my way out of it. But I love how you just summarized it there, Nick. Is like slow it down, and you need to enter from the body. Like do something to your body first. You know, like almost if you saw a child in distress, like you know, and we see animals do this as well. You know, in nature, they're just scooped up, they're held. It's not like, right, let me sit there and help you think this through. Like the first thing to do is to soothe the body, to regulate the nervous system, and then think.
Yeah, it's a good example.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving things in a new direction, you both co-host a podcast, The Therapy Floor, which explores human experience through the lens of psychology and aims to tackle a wide range of personal dilemmas about human behavior and the psychological mechanisms that play in our lives. So let's move it to personal dilemmas, because we haven't talked a lot about that on this podcast. Which personal dilemmas do you think people are most struggling to cope with and overcome today? Start with you, Vicky.
I think we may have slightly touched on this. I think Ritz might have, but I think trusting themselves and not knowing, maybe they have a dilemma, they don't know necessarily which direction to take. And they feel stuck, they feel paralyzed with indecision. And usually I find that when these dilemmas come in, I think they're also reflective of what I typically face in the clinic room is sometimes people really do know the answer or they know what they want to do, but there is that lack of trust in themselves and feeling like, I don't know if I'm making the right choice. And sometimes they need some validation. They need some validation over their experiences, their feelings, and sometimes just to trust their intuition and their gut, as we've been saying earlier. So I'd say that's like a pretty typical dilemma that we encounter in the therapy floor. And this could be decisions with relationships, with, career, with thinking about their purpose in life. Just not necessarily trusting themselves.
Great.
Yeah, and I guess to take that just a little bit deeper, I think what we have tended to see from our experience and then from these dilemmas as well, it's often linked to boundaries and people pleasing. So, when we strip it back, why are people struggling to trust themselves, it's often because they've grown up or they have just learnt to not listen to their own needs, to wipe their own needs out, to be of service to other people. Like that's how they found their role in the world. That's how they found their role to survive in childhood. And, I remember Vicky once said on a podcast, how smart of you that you learn as a child in order to get love, you had to please others. Like that's actually really smart of you. But guess what? You don't have to do that anymore. You can put that down. And it was such a groundbreaking moment, I would say, for a moment in our podcast, to recognize it was a really smart thing to do when you needed to do it in order to survive. And, in childhood, survival is about being loved. That's really what that child is needing, is just that love and that attunement and that secure attachment. So they're trying to find any way to get it. And so when they find this clever way to get it, it then ends up leaking into their adult life. And so we see that as, I'm struggling to trust myself because I don't really know who I am at the moment. I'm so used to knowing what other people need. I don't even know what I need. Or I think I know what I need, but is this what I need? Is that what I need? And then boundaries will often come into play with that, because you're not necessarily treating somebody in isolation. As we said, you're treating people who are having relationships with multiple, people, whether that be their parents, their partner, their children. And so when the boundaries come down, that's going to have some tantrums, that's going to have ripple effects. And I think it's staying firm in those boundaries, which is such a hard thing to do, I think, to have firm and kind boundaries.
I want to ask you about that. We were going to move forward to our final question, but I'd love to maybe get potentially a semi-brief answer here on that. The word acceptance keeps coming up, right? And you've talked a bit about CBT, challenging thoughts, those sorts of things. We've hit distress tolerance. I think my question is, and push back if you feel like this is not a common struggle, but it seems to me that a real common struggle is, even if I want to notice my thoughts and notice my feelings and be more mindful, right? It's the moment of sustaining distress tolerance, fighting the urge, right? To, Vicky, you mentioned, take on the bad habit or lean into the unproductive or maybe unnecessary thought. Like that instance of, can I change this thinking pattern or behavior? And the reason acceptance keeps coming up is Ritz, you've mentioned shadow side a couple of times, and I think you just described when the adaptive becomes maladaptive, right? And I wonder if there is a maladaptive aspect to trying to maybe think your way out of some of these realities and unpleasant feelings, and what you think the role of acceptance might be as an alternative strategy in those moments. I hope that question makes sense, a bit convoluted.
Yeah. Sorry, Vicky.
Okay, I was going to say kind of, yeah. Are you saying that, or are you asking whether it's important for us to accept, maybe in that place of hesitation, or it's really easy for us to slip into that maladaptive way of behaving? There's a part of us that actually needs to accept that that's easy for us to do. That's kind of part of our process, that's kind of part of our experience and part of who we are. And I think that for change to occur, for more adaptive processes and mechanisms to occur, we also need to accept what is currently what it is, what we're currently experiencing and our struggles. And I think it's really hard to fight for change if we don't accept currently where we are right now. That's what I was thinking when I was hearing
this. Okay. After we've checked our reality and challenged some of those thoughts and made sure, to your point. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious, because phrases like validating beliefs and what, these are tricky concepts, right? I think you get sometimes straddle a line between, we'll say with clients a lot, like there's sometimes a thin line between challenging your beliefs and potentially gaslighting yourself, right? That's kind of where that question was coming from. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Ritz, anything to add there? Hope that makes more sense.
Yeah, I think for me, I would be looking at it as sometimes there is acceptance. You're not going to do it in the moment, right? Because we're talking about neuroplasticity here. you've been doing it this way, let's say for like 30 odd years, and let's say, you've always been catching with your right arm, and here I am saying, hey, guess what? I'm showing you can have these awareness of your thoughts, and you can choose to have these different behaviors. So your left arm is in a cast, and I'm cutting it off for you, and now you can catch with your left arm. But here's the ball. What are you going to do? Of course you're going to go for your right arm. So I think there is acceptance of that, Nick, in the sense where sometimes when we're bored, when we're struggling, when we're not monitoring ourselves, we are going to go back to old habits. And that doesn't mean that we have to berate ourselves for it. I always say to my clients, like, go back and do a post-mortem. Just because you didn't catch it in the moment doesn't mean that that's it. Catch it when you're in a better headspace, do a post-mortem of what happened, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, and then you have a choice. Did that work for you? Did it work for you? And if it did, fine, fair enough. Who am I to argue with that? And if it didn't, what do you want to do about it? So I think it's also coming back to that autonomy, which then it just taps back into that authenticity of it.
Yeah. That's part of why I asked as well, right? Because ultimately acceptance and ACT is, as I understand it, is centered around values, right? Yeah. Which to me is going to be intimately tied to authenticity, concordance, coherence, those sorts of things. So, but that's helpful. Yeah, I appreciate you tying that together. We want to take you both to our final question here. This is our very creatively titled Flourishing question. If you were to boil down the vast sort of knowledge and strategies that you have at your disposal to kind of, where's the juice most worth the squeeze? Somebody's trying to flourish a bit more. Where do you tend to see some of the most success or the highest rate of success, or you just think is a great place for people to get started? And Vicky, maybe we'll start with you.
So I like to encourage people to, first to identify like where, in what area of your life do you want to flourish even more? And let's think about the big picture. It's similar to when, people come into therapy and we're doing an assessment and I ask them at the end, what are your goals for therapy? What do you want to get out of this? And some people may say, oh, I want to feel like more confident in myself. Okay, great. To get really practical, I like to say, okay, if you were more confident, what would you be doing that you aren't currently doing right now? And let's start there. And so let's take the backwards approach of thinking practically. Yeah, how can if I felt more confident, maybe I would go to a dance class by myself. Right, let's start there. How can we get you to this dance class by yourself? So yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah, great. Scale up to where you want to be, reverse engineer it, go step by step. Yeah, great. Love it. Good. Ritz?
For me, I'm going to bring in Reflect with Dr. Ritz here, and I'm all about keeping it simple and habit formation and habit stacking. Go back to the basics. When you wake up, give yourself an affirmation. When you go to bed, think of 3 things you're grateful for. That's it. Start your day and end your day with intention and with a ritual. And I feel like when you can do that, it's, I call that brain flossing. I want like journaling and checking in with yourself to be the same as people having good dental hygiene, have good mental hygiene. And I think that when you start to do that, when you start to have that relationship with yourself, you'll be so amazed how everything starts to shift and you'll start to flourish.
Great. Thank you.
Love that. Thank you so much, both of you, for a wonderful conversation today. We'll make sure we link in the show notes your awesome podcast, The Therapy Floor, and your websites. Anything else you want to share with our listeners about where they can find out more about you guys and your work?
Dr. Vicky and I also offer deep dive coaching. So if you have got a dilemma and you think, actually, I'd really love to take this to have a 1-on-2 session with 2 psychologists, then we offer that too. And then I also have my Reflect with Dr. Ritz journal. So if you're really interested in habit formation and making small incremental changes to your day, then we'll link that in the show notes as well, how you can sign up. It's free and for 2 months, and then it's totally low cost. It's cheaper than a coffee.
It's called Reflect with Dr. Ritz, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. So anything else you want to add there, Victoria?
No. But thanks for having us on.
No, thank you. So
thanks for coming on. Great. Yeah, great conversation. Really appreciate the time and expertise.
I found the questions really deep. I really enjoyed them.
Oh, good.
We really enjoyed
Good.
them. Yeah, absolutely. Love the connections you're drawing between authenticity and flourishing and emotional self-regulation and resilience, coming full circle and process and so on. It's a wonderful set of psychological and philosophical connections here today, types of suffering. Awesome. So thank you to all of you for listening or watching today. This has been a wonderful conversation with Dr. Ritz Birah and Dr. Victoria Uwannah. This is how becoming authentic helps you flourish. Thank you for listening to another episode of Flourish FM. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.